Hey friends, welcome to September. If we haven't met before, my name is Blake Shook, and I so enjoy getting to spend an hour with you guys every month to talk about bees and beekeeping. I've been a beekeeper for almost 23 years, and I've gone from two hives in my backyard to over 30,000 hives. And I love doing these monthly buzz webinars where I can take what I've learned and try to really distill it down into practical beekeeping tips that are helpful for you, no matter your scale of beekeeping. We have a lot to cover today. I can't believe fall is almost here. Depending on where you live, you might feel like, hey, fall's nowhere to be seen. It's still crazy hot. Or you might be feeling that crisp, cool breeze during the day and cooler nights. So we'll talk about all of this in our time together today as we discuss what that means for your bees. So let's get into it. As we get rolling here, Stand soft sugar bricks are fully in stock. These are fantastic for fall feeding, especially if you've got a hive that needs a little bit of food but isn't starving. This is a great, it's got sugar, it's got protein, it's got essential oils. I recommend everybody throw one of these on your hive going into the fall. You can order these online, of course, and they'll ship to you within a couple of days. Um, Bees, we have bees available for pre-order for 2026. So if remember, the key here is that the sooner you order, the better dates you get to pick. So the early dates always sell out quickly. So make sure you get your orders in ASAP for your 2026 bees. We know it's really almost fall when we open up orders again for bees for the upcoming year. Last thing I want to mention is our global pollen patties. These are fantastic. Again, we'll talk a lot about this later in this webinar, about how to use them, when to use them, but this is the time of year it's time to start putting pollen patties on your hive. So I really, really recommend you get pollen patties, you get them on your bees ASAP. This is the time of year where it really, really matters. Sherry, what do we have going on in September topic wise?
September. I'm with
Crazy,
you.
crazy,
It's
crazy.
crazy, crazy. Where did the year go, y'all? And the older I get, the faster these years go. It's like phew, something about a snowball going downhill, right? Well, I'm super excited because this is a wonderful time of year to be a beekeeper because it's cooler in our suits, and I am all over that. Okay, so September topics, and you see here, I repost this every month of where you can find information, not just these topics, but any question you have. If it's about beekeeping, we've got that answer, and there's been an article written. I know Blake and I have both written every single one. So go into either the search button that's circled the little hourglass thing. I mean the little magnifying glass, or Bee Help and Answers and TBS monthly articles. They have these articles and also everything else that we will and will be talking about, have talked about, will be talking about, and also Ask Blake Bot. But so week one in your emails, B Talk solving everyday hive problems. This is a Q&A. We've gone in and we pulled some super great Q&A questions that have come to us that I know you are thinking about. If you haven't thought about it yet, you will. So we're going to try to, I guess, answer that before you have the question. Isn't that helpful? I think it is. So we're going to be sending those out week one. All these will be published come by the time you watch this video. So they'll be there ready for you. Week two, we'll be sending out by email fall varroa management, testing, treating, and timing it right. Huge for this time of year. We have got to get varroa under control. I'd be willing to bet Blake's going to talk about that tonight or today. Week three, fall nutrition, feeding with purpose for a better winter hive. Super, super important. I bet he talks about that too. Week four, equalizing colonies, boosting weaker colonies by sharing resources. One of my favorite things to do, and it's something I'm going to talk about here right now. Blake, would you flip that slide? Well, I'm only going to touch on this because Blake may talk about it. Plus, I know that there's going to be several things that go on through the month that we're going to go in depth. But I want you to read this article. It is super important. Plus, we have videos attached. Points to make, one of the most valuable skills to learn. And one way we start off this article, and I'm gonna read it because it really, to me, puts a bullet point by it. There's something incredibly satisfying about this part of beekeeping. My favorite part, I think I said that. It's like solving a living puzzle, moving pieces around, balancing resources, and watching the whole yard improve because of it. That truly puts it all in a nice little package. It really will fix, number two, the root of the problem. But you do, if you've got some weak hives, you're going to need to fix the root of the problem because sometimes it's varroa, sometimes it's just bad nutrition, so forth and so on. So you'll need to go in, check out which are your best hives, and that is your donor hive. And then you're going to have some that you need to add resources to. We go through it in detail in the article, but that gets you started. And number three, super important, don't rob from Peter to pay Paul. You don't want to hurt the good hive in order to try and rescue one that may or may not make it. So make sure that when you do equalizing, you're doing it where everyone's going to benefit. You're kind of reducing down some overabundance in a good hive and increasing where a needy hive may benefit. So make sure you're not hurting one to help another because sometimes that won't work. Take away from this, one of the easiest, most overlooked, underperformed tasks by up and coming beekeepers. I know I was one of those. It was so nerve-wracking to think I was going to be taking out of one hive and actually putting bees and resources into another one. I was afraid of how that was going to work, were the bees going to get along. We go through that in the article. I promise they will. And the last bullet point, keep three or more hives so this technique can benefit all of them. And that is, I can't stress that enough. Super important to not just have one or two, but three hives is your optimal start and stay space if you want to just stay small. Of course, more than three is great. I know that personally, so does Blake, but no less than that if you can manage it. So there you go. That's all I got,
That's
Blake.
awesome, Sherry. I don't know. I think that three might be the perfect number for beehives. 30,000 getting a little crazy. So thank you. Great tips. Let's jump out into the bee yard. Let's see what the bees are up to this month and cover some practical tips in the bee yard. Then we'll jump back in here and keep on going.
So we're going to look at this hive in the context of what do they need before going into winter. Now, depending on where you are in the country, this is super relevant or not. But, usually I look at 4 weeks before daytime temperatures are in the 50s. I need to have my hive 100% ready for winter. So however many pounds of honey you need in your area, varroa mite's completely under control, 4 weeks before daytime temperatures are in the 50s. If you're up north, that's like now. If you're way down south, then you've probably got 6 weeks to 2 months before you get to that point. If you're in the southeast, yeah, again, you never get there. But when it comes to food, if you're in the northern half of the United States, you probably need, or really the northern third, you need closer to 80 pounds of stored honey to overwinter. If you're in the southern half or so, you really need more like 40 pounds. So, and I want to be at that point 4 weeks before daytime temperatures consistently are in the 50s. Because even once you have cold fronts start blowing through and you've got days in the 60s and 50s, bees just stop taking and storing food efficiently. So we're going to look at this hive, see if they need food or not. The other huge caveat is, my goodness, look at the U.S. drought map. Google U.S. drought monitor, and if you're in a drought area, that's a great indication you should really be feeding pollen patties. If you're in an area with a really strong fall nectar flow, awesome fall pollen flow with a huge variety of pollen coming in like crazy, no drought, you can probably get away in many cases without feeding pollen patties. I don't think it's going to hurt your bees. Good chance it'll still help them. But especially if you're in a drought area, if you're in Texas like I am, I mean, we're in a pretty rough drought. We haven't had a good rain in a long time. The fall pollen flow is terrible. You need to be feeding a pollen patty every 7 to 10 days. And that's ensuring that those developing baby bees that have to survive all winter long are being fed a proper nutritional diet so that they can survive the whole winter. If the bees don't have the nutritional resources to properly feed those developing bees, then they aren't going to survive the winter. So, if you're in a drought area or don't have a great fall pollen flow, feed pollen patties as an insurance every 7 to 10 days. So, checking out this hive, the first thing I do, this top box, this was just the honey super we put on after extraction, and we fed them a couple gallons of syrup, and lifting up on it, it's got about 30 pounds stored back in it from our feeding and a little bit of nectar they found somewhere. So, all I really want this time of year, as long as, I'm about 6 weeks to 7 weeks, knock on wood, from days in the 50s and 60s. So I really only want about 30 pounds since I've got a long way until I've got those daytime temperatures that are really cool. So I'm probably not going to be feeding this hive. Now, if I've got under 30 pounds, I'm going to be giving them some gallons of syrup in September. The big thing I want to see, though, is I want to make sure I haven't overfed. I want to find frames that are mostly empty or that have plenty of room for the queen to still lay. So, I've got a couple frames like this still in the hive where, they're not completely full. They've got some open syrup and nectar, but, there's plenty of room for the bees to move honey out of the way if they want to give the queen somewhere to lay, and that's what's important. I've got a handful of frames in here that, this is beautiful. I mean, this is exactly what I'm looking for this time of year. I've got capped brood all in the middle. I've got a thick band of honey around the edge. That's really what I want to see. They're leaving this middle open for brood rearing. They're putting a thick band of honey around the edges of the frames in preparation for winter. That's what I want to see. This box has probably 10 to 15 pounds of stored honey. So they've really got plenty of stored nectar. The bottom box only, I would say, probably has about 10 pounds of stored honey in it, but they've got plenty of honey up above. And that's fine. This is probably a hive I will only give a couple more gallons of feed to this year, and they should be in pretty good shape. Now the last thing I'm looking at is I still want to see eggs and larvae, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of pollen. So I really think that, again, this hive, I'm feeding all of my hives a pollen patty every 7 to 10 days across the board, because what little pollen I am seeing in general right now just doesn't have a lot of variation to it. You don't only need pollen, but you need variation in pollen, different colors. And I'm just not seeing that. So this hive has about 6 frames of brood, which isn't bad for this time of year. It's about what you would expect with the drought we've been in. They've got sufficient stores, but not a lot of pollen. So really all I'm doing to a hive like this is I am giving them pollen patty every 7 to 10 days. I'm making sure the varroa mites are under 1 per 100 bees, and that's it. I mean, I'll keep giving them pollen patties probably through mid-October. I'll probably give them a couple more gallons of syrup in early October, just so they can kind of put that wherever they want it in their brood nest area. And other than that, this hive's good to go.
Okay, September tips. Welcome back. We are going to jump into some questions. Chari has gathered some great questions from you guys, and we always want to make this as interactive as possible. And so, Chari, what have our friends asked this month?
I'll tell you, I had so many to choose from, I had to narrow it down. Folks are really, I think this is, especially if it's your first time to go into fall, you're really concerned about, did I do everything? Is everything going to be right? The first question I'm going to tell you is something that I have thought about myself and have experienced myself, and I bet you have too. So, number one, my neighbor also has hives, but he refuses to treat for varroa mites. I am treating mine with Apivar. Is there anything else I should do?
such a good question.
Yes.
And I deal with this a lot as a commercial beekeeper because we often have bees in areas where there's other commercial beekeepers, and I can't trust that they're treating their hives properly, and their varroa mites will migrate, or the bees will intermingle somewhat, and the varroa mites will transfer into my hives. It's a tough situation, but it's not that uncommon. Um, and what I do about it is I make sure I've got a treatment on, which you've done with Apivar, which is great. And then the key is to make sure that treatment lasts right up until the bees start to cluster for the winter. Because once the bees kind of stop flying much, they're not going to transfer varroa mites between you and your neighbor anymore. And so as long as that treatment's in there for another month or so, then you should be good. I will say with just a couple hives in your backyard and a couple hives in his backyard, probably not that much intermingling going on. So I wouldn't be terribly concerned about it with just a few hives here and there, but having that treatment in until the bees start clustering should do the trick.
Very good advice. I'd also talk to that neighbor, try to become their friend and show,
Yeah, you try.
maybe even get them over there and let's look at, the hive in comparison, because I'd be willing to bet there's a difference between your hives that you're doing a good
Right,
job of management and
right.
theirs that maybe they're not. But that's super good advice. Super good advice. All right, number two.
Yeah.
I put my super on with a queen excluder only because it was so hot and I think it helped keep them cool. When should I remove it for the upcoming winter?
Yeah, that's an easy one. So I would say that my rule of thumb is that when nighttime temperatures are consistently in the 50s and 60s and daytime temperatures are down into the 80s, it's fine to remove that second box. Simple as that. So once we're out of the 90s, boxes can come off.
And we're ready for that out of the
Oh,
90s,
we're
aren't
so
we?
ready.
So ready. All right, next question. What do we do about the mold and fungus if we see it? Burn barrel? In other words, do we burn the equipment?
No. So the good news is that when you have mold and fungus, that's really not a big deal. I know it looks bad, but the bees are really, really, really good at cleaning it up. So if it's like covering an entire frame, what I do is I soak it with a water hose and then shake all the water out, let it air dry, and you can put it right back into the hives. If it's just a patch here and there, again, the bees will clean it right up. So it's not harmful. The mold and fungus is not harmful to the bees in any way. You can like do the water hose method and help them clean it up a little bit, but you absolutely don't have to burn or throw those frames away, and it won't hurt the bees.
Not at all. And we keep bees in a moist environment here, don't we? We are a very moist environment. So I've actually had it growing on that last frame, the honey frame next to the sidewall, and also on the sidewall. And just a tip out of my book is I just got down there with my glove and just kind of, if it was really getting a little bit overgrowth, I just kind of clean it with my hand on the sidewall. And then what you said after that. So I mean, I've had mold and growing some
Yeah, yeah,
pretty heavy at
yeah,
times.
for sure.
All right. I have a hive that has gone vertical and only filling the center 5 or 6 frames. Should I move the top brood and honey to the bottom box to fill it and hope they don't move back up the center? I've heard of this happening.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I mean, bees like to move up. And so if they've got extra boxes, they'll often fill up the centers of the hive. In the summer, I just kind of leave them alone, let them do their thing. Once we get another, once you're within a couple weeks of daytime temperatures, in the 50s at night, if the bees are not filling up all the boxes, then yeah, I would take the very top box and then just move the brood and the honey down, and then you can remove that top box. So kind of consolidate it a bit for them. Assuming you've got like 3 or 4 boxes, you should really go into the winter with 2 boxes. Make sure you always keep the brood together. But yeah, I mean, once we get daytime temperatures, 80 degrees or less and nights in the 50s, you can start kind of consolidating everything down to just 2 boxes, assuming the bees will fit in those 2 boxes. If not, 3 is fine, but Yeah, two, if the bee population just fills up to consolidating it down to two boxes is perfectly normal.
And that's a great answer. You got to keep a bee to box ratio, right?
Right.
Don't want to go with too much space in the winter,
Yes.
really any time of year. But that's a great answer. All right, last question. With queens only available from April through August, how do folks handle queen deaths in hives outside of that window?
Yeah, and that's a frustrating one because, you can lose hives easily that way. I mean, in spring, if it's in March and you're in the south, they can often raise their own queen. I would just give them a few frames of brood to boost up the strength a little bit, in March. But other than March, if it's February, January, February, or if it's fall, September, October, unfortunately, if you can't find a queen, your best bet is to combine that hive with another hive. And I know that's so frustrating to do, but like right now, I mean, they aren't going to raise a healthy queen in most cases. It's too late, it's too hot. They're starting to kick the drones out either because it's too hot or fall's coming, depending on where you are in the country. And so they're just not going to raise a healthy queen. And so, if you have a hive that goes queenless this late in the year, you can try to find a queen. There are some breeders out there still selling queens through September. So I would hunt around a bit. But once, especially you get past September, they are just, they are just not going to, they're just not going to raise a new healthy queen. So it's better just to combine that hive, unfortunately.
How long can they last? I mean, can hives last through, say they become queenless in November. Can they hang tight until queens are available in April?
My concern with that is usually that they're probably going to become a drone layer before then. So having no queen pheromone that long,
Mm-hmm.
that hive is going to shift to a drone layer before
hmm
then.
hmm That's very possible. Yeah, and the warmer we are, whatever climate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very good. That's
Good
it. That's
questions.
all I've
Good
got,
questions,
Blake.
guys. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you, Sherry. And let's jump into the rest of the class. So let's talk a little bit about fall splits. Now, this is a common topic that a lot of people have questions about because, the bees aren't doing anything in the fall in most states. The bees look really strong. And so it's really tempting to say, well, hey, let's increase our hive numbers. Let's do some splits. So I've done a lot of fall splits over the years. And here's a general rule of thumb I've found to be very true nationwide. Generally speaking, doing splits after the 4th of July is not worth it. I've made splits between July 10th and into November even. And unless you're in Florida, which is the exception, unless you're in southern Florida, typically it's about a 50% success rate, which meaning when you make your splits, about 50% die before the following spring, which just puts you generally at your number before you made splits, and you end up with weaker hives. So I don't usually recommend doing fall splits this late in the year. If you're going to do fall splits late in the year, my one recommendation would be instead of taking one really strong hive and splitting it in half, I would pull one or two frames of bees and brood from every single hive and then combine it into 5 or 6 frames of brood in one split, give them a mated queen and then feed very heavily. And that's your best chance of success. Typically, about 50% of those will make it through to next spring, but you didn't weaken any one hive because you only pulled 1 or 2 frames of brood out of your strongest hive. So, if you're going to do fall splits, that's how I would do it this time of year. But in general, I wouldn't do it. It's just typically not worth the effort. So inside fall hives, I'm usually expecting to see anywhere from 3 to 6 frames of brood, maybe a little more on strong hives, but typically hive strength is starting to, or brood production is starting to decline at this point. There should be great bee populations, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But generally speaking, the brood quantity is going to start decreasing this time of year. So don't panic. If you see this, it's normal for the bees to start shrinking down the brood nest, shrinking down the area the queen is going to be laying, and you're going to start seeing less and less brood in the hives. Varroa mites, you're in the final window to effectively treat for varroa mites. It's critical if no treatment has been made yet that you do a mite treatment. If you treat it in July, it's time to test again to make sure your treatment was effective. Again, month of September is really your last good window to treat. You really, really, really should have treated in July. If you didn't, then you certainly need to treat now. So get that treatment on immediately and then verify it works. Very, very important. Now, keep in mind if you need a refresher on how to treat for varroa mites, what to use, etc., watch our July webinar. So, and we also have a varroa management class under advanced classes on the TBS website. So, if the topic of treating for varroa mites is confusing to you, like it is for a lot of us, definitely check out those two resources, and that's going to really, really help you as you treat for varroa mites. Quick reminder, sticky boards, great way to test for your varroa mite levels. I won't read through all these directions. You guys can see it on the screen, but this is how to test for varroa mites using sticky boards. We've got a great video on our YouTube channel as well. If you just search sticky boards on our YouTube channel, you'll see a video on how to use sticky boards. It's not the most accurate test for varroa mites. An alcohol wash is, but a lot of people are not going to go to the trouble of an alcohol wash, and this is a better alternative than nothing. All you got to do is stick it under your hive for 24 hours. Something else you may see this time of year is bald brood. And so it's brood that the pupa are uncapped. So we're not talking about larva. Larva is supposed to be uncapped, but this is when brood is in the pupa stage. And you see that in this picture, they've removed the cap. Is it a problem? Is it a positive? Well, it's a good question. If it's in a linear pattern, so a straight line with a raised lip around it, like you can see in this picture, you often see this in a very weak hive when wax moths are tunneling underneath the comb and kind of kill those pupa, and then the bees are uncapping it to clean it out. Usually you only see this in really small, weak hives with 6 frames of bees or less. Much more commonly is just a scattered pattern where the bees are just randomly uncapping these pupa. This is hygienic behavior. The cells appear more chewed down. The hive is removing larvae and pupa typically infected with varroa mites. It's a positive trait, so it's good that bees are doing this because it's hygienic behavior, but it usually indicates in most situations that you do have a varroa mite problem. And so that's when you really need to do a test and really probably need to do a treatment. Anytime a hive is exhibiting visual signs of a varroa mite infestation, that's more of a problem. It's a sign that, hey, this isn't good. This is, the varroa mite levels are getting really high, and that you're seeing these symptoms, and that's highly problematic. So that's why we always encourage to test and treat, by July, so you don't get to this point. Let's talk a little bit about feeding as we go into the fall, transitioning from trickle feeding to winter feeding. My recommendation is feed as much pollen sub as the bees will eat now through November. So, you want to make sure they can eat everything in about a week, which means for a really strong hive with, a box full of bees or more, you can put a full 1 pound patty on at a time. They should eat it in about a week. I wait 1 or 2 days. I give them another patty. At a minimum, I would give them 2 pollen patties per month now through November. But if you've got a strong hive that's eating more than that, that's great. They'll be stronger and better next spring if you just keep giving it to them. But for sugar syrup, I'm usually feeding a fourth to a half a gallon per week. I'm now feeding 2-to-1 sugar syrup until a hive has at least 30 to 40 pounds in their second box. The 1st of October, I'm switching to feeding up to a gallon per week if they haven't reached that point yet. My goal is, by the 1st of October, I want them to have all the winter stores that they need so they're ready for winter. In the South, that's about 30 to 40 pounds of stores. In the north, that's going to be more like 80 pounds of stores. And if you have a hive that is already pretty much there, stores wise, giving them stand soft sugar brick is a great way to kind of keep that momentum going, keep them raising some brood, give them a trickle of food without overfeeding them. Why should you feed pollen substitute? Well, a common question is, well, will it make my bees too strong and raise too much brood? The answer is no. It's really, and do you need your bees that strong? Do you need to feed if you're bringing in, do you need to feed pollen substitute if your bees are bringing in tons of natural pollen? These are really good common questions. So I do this for a living, right? I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on pollen substitute, and I still do it every year, every fall. And there's a reason for that. And it's because typically speaking, the bees, we can't always know in advance what kind of a fall pollen flow we're going to have. The bees need a wide variety of pollen to make sure that the nutrients in that pollen is sufficient to rear healthy winter bees. And if they don't have all the nutrients they need, they're not able to rear healthy winter bees or the bees that are going to survive all winter long. And if they don't have that, then your hive starts dwindling and crashing before the following spring. So for me, pollen substitute is insurance. It might slightly increase the amount of brood the bees are going to rear, but not really. That's not my goal. My primary goal is that as that winter generation of bees are being raised right now, that it's a healthy generation that can easily survive the entire winter. So, yes, I would feed pollen substitute every year, regardless of what's going on in the environment personally. Now, what I always recommend to you is test. So, do it on half your hives, don't do it on the other half. Compare the results next spring. Sometimes in some areas, you may not need to feed pollen substitute. I view it as a cheap insurance. But if you are skeptical, just do it on half your hives and not the other half, and then compare. Already covered that. Some final summary points here. What do bees need to survive the winter? They need at least 30 to 40 pounds of honey in their second box in regions with average daytime winter temperatures of 40 to 50 degrees, or 60 to 80 pounds in areas where daytime temperatures are below 40 in the winter. You need mites under 2 per 100 bees. You need sufficient bee population. You need a healthy laying queen. That's it. So if you do those things, make that your goal, your hive should survive the winter. When to stop feeding syrup? When the daytime temperatures are in the 50s, I wrap it up because they're not going to eat syrup when it's that cold. Liquid syrup, that's when you can switch to like a stand soft sugar brick. When a hive with one deep box or more full of bees has 30 to 40 pounds in the second box and 3 to 4 frames in the bottom box, you can usually wrap up feeding. When a hive with less than one deep box of bees has about 30 total pounds of stores, you can stop feeding. And just as a reminder, one deep frame full of honey is about 6 pounds. I'm going to skip that. So fall and winter hive configuration. My goal for my bees going into winter is 2 boxes full of bees, or 2 boxes, not really more than 2 boxes. However, if you've got 3 boxes and they're all full of bees, leave it. That's not going to be a problem. You got to remember the bees don't keep the entire inside of the hive cool. They keep their winter cluster warm. They keep their winter cluster inside the hive warm. So if you've got 3 boxes, it's not like they're going to get too cold. But generally speaking, it's unnecessary. So if I've got 2 boxes, they're both full of bees and honey, and that third box is pretty much empty. Yeah, I usually pull it off in early October. You've only got about a month to a month and a half, depending on where in the country you are, to fix any weak hives. So now's the final opportunity to boost any weak hives. Here's kind of the chart I've made of hive growth and where bees need to be at certain times of the year. Here in September, you need to have, my goal is about 10 frames of bees per hive. And if they are at 8 frames of bees or less, then they could use some work. If there are 4 frames of bees are left, I consider it beyond saving. So if you're saving a hive, here's your options if you're trying to boost a weak hive or save a hive. You can add brood from other hives. So I would usually add 1 good frame of cap brood every week or so. That's the best way to boost up strength. You can add bees. You can go to my YouTube channel and I've got some videos on how to add bees to a hive. Generally speaking, I would just add a frame of cap brood, maybe leave the bees on it if you're sure the queen isn't there, and most of them will assimilate into the new hive. Make sure varroa mites are under control because no matter how much brood you add to a hive, if it's got a bad varroa mite problem, it's not going to resolve the problem. Make sure you're feeding. Again, if they're short on syrup, then if they're starving, again, brood isn't going to help. Maybe give them a little bit of pollen substitute. And then when you give them syrup, you can put some probiotics or essential oils. I would go with the complete into that syrup as well. But the biggest thing you can do to save a weak hive is you got to get more bees and brood in there. That's the number one thing you can do to save it. And again, if it's below 4 frames of bees, I wouldn't even bother trying to save it. At this point, I would combine it with another hive. If it's more like 5 to 8 frames of bees, then yeah, give them a frame of capped brood. Maybe one now, one next week, and that really should boost up their population. Final notes, remove the queen excluders. So if you still have queen excluders on your hives between your brood boxes and supers, time to get those off. As the hive starts to cluster, you don't really know where that cluster is going to end up. If they end up above the queen excluder, you don't want your queen trapped down below. Queen excluder is also just very disruptive and kind of breaks the brood cycle or the brood nest up really severely. So you don't want to leave those queen excluders on. Time to pull those off and store them for next year. Entrance reducers, if you use entrance reducers, and it's completely optional, but if you use them, I would put them on when daytime temperatures are consistently in the 60s. So that's kind of the trigger point for me. Daytime temperatures are in the 60s, entrance reducers go on. If you don't use them, it's no problem. I haven't used them in years, but if you prefer to use it, once daytime temps are in the 60s, time to put those bad boys on. And with that, guys, that's it. So October, we're really going to focus on kind of final housekeeping as we go into the winter months. But September is your last big month to really affect change on your hive before it starts getting too cold. And then we'll get into some final housekeeping in October, and then hopefully it's cooler weather for all of us in October. So great to see all of you. I can't wait to see you in a month, and hope you have a great September. Have a good day, everybody.